So, this is our fourth week, starting tonight, and I sent an email out with tonight's class, which should have had the other three too, so you should have them all. If anybody needs one again, there's some back there, and then I've got some up here. On the left there, Robin, thanks. And we'll start in about a minute. Okay, good evening. All right, so basically we're talking about the I and the we. And just to kind of make this simple, because it's always best to keep things simple. And I won't tell you what that acronym stands for because I don't want to insult you. But to keep things simple is, the idea is that we are all a little bit selfish. We all have a little bit more ego than we should have. So the idea is, as we die to self, as we try to do things for Christ and do things for others, that in turn strengthens the congregation and strengthens the we part. So that's what we've been looking at. We've been looking at things that we can do individually in order to make the group stronger. That's the whole idea. And we're going to be looking at another one tonight. So the first week we kind of introduced that, and then we've talked about a few things, and we'll ask a few questions here. And that should sort of get you lined out to that. If you don't have lessons, we have some back there, and I have some. Okay, how are we reshaping the I, thus strengthening the we, and then what happens? So that's what I just sort of explained. So who can tell me what that means, even though I just said it? How are we reshaping the I, thus strengthening the we? What do we mean when we say reshaping the I? Exactly. You're changing who you are, so there's less focus on yourself and more focus on others. More focus on, when Jesus tells, remember they talk to Jesus and say, hey, we want to be on the right hand. You know, we want to be up here at the top. What does he say? Can't do that. That's not for me to determine. He also, in a similar context, says what? The last shall be first, and the first shall be last. I used to tell my kids that when they wanted to be in the front of the line, and they probably told me that when I did too. But that's exactly right. So that's what's the context of that going on. And as you live that, and as you practice that, then the we becomes stronger. And then something funny happens. When you get to be part of a congregation, which in many ways we are, in some ways we're not, which is why we're having the class. When you get to be a part of a congregation that becomes stronger as a group, what happens to the I? It fades away, and you become more like what God intended you to be. And you'll actually feel better about the I. You'll feel better about yourself. And then, once that happens, then it just doesn't work perfectly, but then the group becomes even stronger because those people are in turn more like what God intended them to be, and then the group becomes more of what the kingdom of God is supposed to be. Does that make sense? That's the whole point of what we're doing. And that's to point us toward being more together, being more focused on love, and being a congregation that is growing just as individual members and then growing as a group. All right. Yes, sir.
I agree with that 100%, but I also believe that the I and the we is the concept, but the I should dissipate.
Yes.
And the we should get greater, because the we should encompass the church, and the church is us. But the I should always be relevant, because the I is what should keep watchful eye on you to know if you are doing what God has instructed you to do. So I believe you need to always, keep a watchful eye on the I, because sometimes you can go to we, and we can all do wrong.
Exactly. And I think, Lee, I hope, you've said that really well, I hope that we kind of get that a little bit from the fact that the we is bigger than the I. But the I is still on the page, but the we is much bigger. And I think what happens in the time in which we live, we tend to have the I too big and the we too small. Excellent. Now, you know, for those of you guys that remember Owen, I often remember both crazy things he said and things he said that were really smart. So I'm going to share with you one tonight that I thought was something he said that was really smart. And he used to say about the gospel that this is serious business. And so I put this in here tonight about what we're talking about. Why is this such serious business, what we're dealing with? It's souls. And, Tom, it's about people who who have accepted Christ and are going about their lives as Christians, perhaps missing something, perhaps missing on the completeness, a more complete picture of what it means to be a follower of Christ. Larry?
If it's about soul only, there's nothing we can do about that. We have to understand that we need to give those folks that don't know the opportunity to be taught, and then let them make their decision based on what they taught, that they read in the Bible, and they've been taught by other godly people. And then it'll become a soul. And then they have a soul, but it's not going to be.
Well, Larry, I think I understand what you're talking about, and I think that's accurate. I think for most of us that are here tonight, what it can mean also is that, you know, I go back to a book I taught years ago called Finishing Strong, and basically the thesis of the book was people don't finish strong, and they took 10 famous people from the 1940s, and only one of them finished strong. And so what happens, I think, to us is we don't finish strong sometimes because we're not doing what we're talking about in this class. And it can go so far, Larry, is to we lose our salvation altogether. So
Yes, they have a soul, it's just not in the right.
exactly. That's the clarification. It's not going to the right place. How's that sound?
They wouldn't like it to cut back.
Yeah, and they're not in the right place right now. All right, it's perfect. So this is a serious thing. It's serious business, and we want to strengthen ourselves in the kingdom of God. All right, what are we supposed to be doing since our last class? Stop that. Let's not go to that. Let's go back up to 1. I forgot about that. What's an image bearer? Tell me what an image bearer is. Tell me why that is so critical for strengthening the we. So first off, what do we mean by this concept of being an image bearer?
We need to be doing God's work.
We need to be doing God's work, and when they see you, Tom, they need to see Jesus Christ. They need to see Christ likeness. You're an ambassador for Jesus Christ. You're supposed to have an aroma of Christ that people want to smell. And they want to see that, and then once they see that, the hope is it becomes more contagious, and then people are excited about it. Now, the reason why that's so important is because if we're doing that as individuals, then our congregation collectively does it in a much more powerful fashion. And as we do it as individuals and as a congregation, people see that, and then they're attracted to come here and to be a part of what we're doing. Okay, last week we talked about getting more naked. Now, what does that mean?
Being real.
Being real?
Being vulnerable.
Being vulnerable. So we talked about that in the context of too often we don't let our hair down and we're not real with people. So as a result, they are uncomfortable in getting close to us. That doesn't mean that you have to tell them every secret thought you've ever had. I don't want to know every secret thought you've ever had. We'll leave that to the Lord. But what it does mean is if somebody asks you something and you've had terrible things are going on in your life, there's nothing wrong with sharing that with them and asking them to pray for you. It is harder to get mad at people that you have been intimate with than it is with people you just have a perfunctory relationship with. And you might, when you do finally get mad at it, you might really be mad, like you are at your family. But you usually get over it with your family, just like you will in this family. But that's the key. We've got to know each other. That's the only way this kind of stuff can work. You've got to know each other. All right. Perfect. So what were we supposed to be doing since our last class? And you can look at number 3 if you forgot. You're supposed to be praying. You're supposed to be praying for this congregation to have an aroma of Christ. You're supposed to be praying for opportunities to serve the King. And there's other things you could be praying about too. You can be praying for us to be more together, to be more unified, to have a strong atmosphere of love. You can be praying about what Elijah's teaching on, this idea of where we're going to try to start doing a lot more discipleship. So you can be praying about those things. But the key thing is you need to be praying for our congregation to grow in spirit and truth, to be stronger, both with the ones that we have here and so strong that we're attracting more people to come here. All right? Okay. And I also asked last week for people to ask somebody to come to class Wednesday night or Sunday morning, or to come to church, people that maybe hadn't been here for a while, or people that are brand new, and if they're not able to come because of COVID, they ask them to watch it online, all those kind of things, so that there's more people being plugged into what we're about. All right, so time and space, that's our topic tonight. And I'll just give a little credit to Tom Roach. He said something to me, I can't remember when it was, the last week, and I texted him and said, what did you say again? Got it, and I knew that was what I wanted to teach on. Kind of like Ray saying something week before last. I usually listen, and hopefully that's a leading from the Lord, but whatever it is, it usually works. So, time and space. Now, I'll kind of explain what I mean by that, since that would be hard for anybody but Tom or I to probably answer. So what we mean by time and space is, in our lives, in each of our lives, both as our family and as a group here, people die. Your mom die, your dad might die, your cousin, your nephew, etc. People get sick. People have problems. I've written several things down. People might be moving. We're really good at helping people move, as Tom and I talked about the other day. People, using another phrase of Owen's, people may need a little help. I usually tried to run when he said that to me. But people might need a little help. So there's a variety of things that happen to people that are often bad, put them in a bad spot. So the reason why I want to talk about time and space tonight is, often our reaction when somebody has something bad happen to them is to do what? There's not a right answer, by the way.
Back away.
Back away. Now, that doesn't mean we're all like that. I'm not saying y'all aren't. But a lot of times when something bad happens to somebody, we back away. Now, and by back away, we'll just say do nothing. Or not much more than nothing. Might make a quick call or a note or something. And I'm not saying those things are nothing. But they're not a ton of stuff, let's just face it. So that's what often happens. We want to give them time and space to get over whatever that problem is. Now, the problem with that, and I'm not saying in some situations that's not a good idea, but the problem with that is what? What? It hurts. What else?
They'll think they're not caring for them.
They'll think you're not caring for them. And what's the longer term problem? It never happens, Richard. You gave them that week of time and space, and then by the second week you've said to yourself, well, it's along now. I don't think I'm going to do anything because it'll look funny. So what I mean by time and space is we wait too long and often we don't do anything. And so why is that? I wrote down sincere sometimes, rationalization sometimes, easier sometimes. Before I get into all of that, Why do we often do that?
Don't know what to say for it.
We sometimes don't know what to say, and we're going to have an answer for that in just a minute. But sometimes we don't know what to say. What else? We're afraid of doing the wrong thing and making a tough situation worse. Excellent answer. What else?
We're all guilty of procrastination on everything, so we put it off and put it off and put it off.
Put it off. And then before long, we've done it at all.
It gets harder, probably. Not probably.
It does.
The longer you put it off, the harder it is.
Particularly something like this.
Do it.
Particularly something like this. Because it's somewhat time sensitive. And we're busy. So another thing along with these three would be we're busy, or we perceive we're busy.
Easier to do nothing.
So the default position, because it's easier, is to do nothing. What else? There's one really, not that this is the best answer, but there's one really good answer we haven't heard yet. There may be 10, but one up in my mind. Larry.
You're aware of someone that is having issues and they can fighting with you. You tell anyone else that you've broken that promise and it could send their soul to hell right then because they're going to back away.
I'd say most of the time we're not dealing with that issue, but on occasion we are. What I'm thinking about is, what's that say back there? Together. I think a big issue sometimes is we don't know each other well enough. And so, and Lee just pointed his finger at me, so I have a funny story about him since he's here tonight that I'll tell. Okay, Lee's mother had passed away, which is not funny at all. But I stopped by his house on the way out of town to pray with him. And he looked at me like, what have I done, when I knocked on the door? And we're close as can be. And so we're worried sometimes about a reaction. And I think that's sometimes because we don't know each other well enough. I knew Lee would be a little taken aback, but I didn't care about it, worry about it, because I know him. And so we've got to know each other and love each other enough so that when there are these kind of times, we know what to do, or we have a better sense of what to do.
And that's kind of what I was getting at earlier when you say you have to minimize I, but don't ever lose I.
That's right.
Because I is what keeps you honest. And if I is what judges you, we can be weak in things and feel uncomfortable about going and doing or saying or reacting to things. But the I in you individualizes it, and you become the person that the we should look at. And
That's making the we better.
And you mimic it.
That's exactly right. Thank you.
So, Robert, one of the things that you and I kind of discussed about this, and I think it's very important to hear, is when we say, I think they need time and space, we're assuming an answer instead of giving them the opportunity to answer for themselves.
Say that one more time, because I think we need to hear that again.
So when we say, I think they need time and space, we're assuming an answer for them instead of giving them the opportunity to tell us what they need. Maybe they do need time and space, and if that's what they say, then okay.
And I think their body language will tell you if you show up too early. You'll know pretty soon it's time to go. They may not say it, but you'll know it.
I would even add to what Tom said, and of course what you're saying. It's much more offensive to not be there when you're needed than it is to show up when you're not needed.
Say that again. We need to hear that.
It's much more offensive to not be there when you're needed than to show up when you're not needed. And so a lot of the times we say, well, I don't know what to say. Well, you just say, I love you. You know, I'm here for you. I don't know what to say. Those are great things to say. But it's better to be there and be wrong than it is to not be there.
That's right. Thank you all. These are great answers. Okay, so just goes along with what you all said. Sometimes it's sincere. We really think that. Sometimes I think we rationalize it because then we don't have to do anything. And as Richard said, it's just it's easier to not do anything. And
isn't
sometimes
that the greatest time to incorporate that thing that he gave us? Why not pray?
exactly,
with that person? That's the perfect time
perfect time.
to pray. And then you're including God.
And then
So
all of
God
us,
knows what to tell you to say.
and then Lee, it's almost like, and it's not magical because it's the Lord, but almost magically the barriers melt away, and that spirit of love and of harmony and with the Holy Spirit, it's become something pretty wonderful. Nick.
When you bring up rationalization, I want us to think about that for a minute, because that's a spiritual thing too. It's not just making excuses. Typically what's going on there is what we're rationalizing away is a pagan instinct that disaster is contagious. That bad things are contagious, and I need to stay away from it. We don't think about it in the front of our brains, but that initial instinct to pull back and avoid somebody who's suffering, that's what's driving that. And it's a spiritual thing, and we need to be conscious of it so that as we're being formed into Christ, Christ went towards suffering, not away from it. And that's our calling too. That's what made Christianity famous in the early centuries of the church, is Christians stayed. Even in the 1800s, in the cholera epidemic in Nashville, the church stayed and took care of people.
So Christ, and I love what Nick said, Christ went towards suffering, not away from it. And we're image bearers of Jesus Christ, so that needs to be the direction we're moving in. Those are great comments. So I had two little things here, and I would never point anybody's name out, usually unless it was somebody that I knew so well that I knew it wouldn't bother them, of positive things. And I thought of on this thing, I thought of Bob, and I thought of Mike and Robin. When Bob Friend died, Bob called me just immediately. And he said, we're going over there. So we went immediately. My initial instinct, I think I was even an elder at that time, my initial instinct would have been, why don't I go tomorrow? They need a little time and space. That was exactly what I thought. And I would have gone tomorrow. But, Bob said it, so I just did it. And I went with him. I don't know who drove. We went over there. And actually, I think that it was exactly the right thing to do. And we had a really good visit. And she needed somebody at that time. I don't think he had passed that long. And so that was an example that struck me about not giving time and space and then going ahead. And then I think Mike and Robin, when Jordan was near death in the hospital, went and sat with them. And so I thought of that. And that's an example of not giving time and space. But as Jerry Chase was a teacher at the Christian Academy when I was there, and he gave a pretty long talk about being a parent. And his theme was be there. Not necessarily that you're saying 400 things, but you were there. And that made me think of that. And with Bob. And I've been in several things with Bob where he just dropped whatever we were doing and then just went. So I think that is the attitude we need to have as opposed to the other. Jeannie? Yes, ma'am.
When Roxy was born preemie, a pound 9 ounces, and that night the elders showed up, both ministers, people. I can't even think how many people came to the hospital that night, in the middle of the night, because they were somewhere else earlier and came back and heard it and came. And for 2 months or whatever, I was never in this building that when we bowed our heads, somebody didn't mention Roxy in the prayer. And it stays. And I believe that it's what saved her.
Well, and I would.
And Samantha, she was in really bad shape that night too. And
And I think that's an example of what a congregation is supposed to be about. And we're hoping to get more like that circumstance. And that's a powerful example. So we have plenty of powerful examples. All right, excellent. All right, let's go to Romans 12, 15 to 16. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never, well, I don't know if that's what I wanted. Is that it? There we go, my bad. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. And I got to thinking about those verses, now that I've read the right ones, it's hard to rejoice with somebody and weep with somebody if you're not there with them in person. Now, you maybe can do it over the phone, but I don't know how effective that would be. So this personal connection, which Jeannie just talked about how powerful that is. And the reason why it even becomes more powerful in the long term is we are all human. So guess what? We occasionally are disappointed, dissatisfied, or something with somebody in here. And so as a result, when you have those kind of experiences, you're more likely to give it a pass. And so it allows people to be more human, and it allows you to give them more grace, because being a part of something like this.
That doesn't make it easy, though.
No, but it's easier. It's easier. All right. So I think, once again, you get back to that key thing in that song that we've sang a couple of times, and this is the idea that you're part of a family. And when you're part of a family, you're going to rejoice with that family, and you're going to weep with that family, and you're going to be there for that family, as opposed to not being there. And one of the tough things about COVID-19 since March of 2020 is there's been such a difficulty because of this. You know, we've had countless people die in nursing homes and assisted living, and they couldn't really have very many loved ones there. Sometimes they would make a waiver at the end because of the contraction of the disease. So this has been a really hard thing. So hopefully we're coming out of all of this to a great degree, and we're going to be able to have more interaction, thus hoping to lead to closer relationships. Anybody else on that?
I just want to highlight, I think you're really onto something, that now is the time to start. And to say, you know, we've got to own that we probably slacked off the last couple of years and used COVID as a cause and an excuse sometimes, a little bit of both. But now we need to really make sure we get this right moving forward.
Yeah.
Start with a clean slate.
And I think it's an opportunity for us to really get more together. And hopefully that will occur, and I think we're starting to see that. But when it comes to disease and those kind of things, I've been wrong about 14 times on it, at least, times 100. So I don't want to say too much absolute and be wrong again. Over here.
Yeah. So Robert, one of the things that we need to remind ourselves too is we're not starting new. We're starting from experience.
That's right. That's a good point. Okay, anybody over here? Let's go to Job 2, 11 through 13. Yeah, that's funny. And somebody from the audience read that if they can read it loud.
Now when Job's three friends heard of all of this evil that had come upon him, they came each from his own place. But Eliphaz,
Close enough.
the Termanite, Bildad, the shoot height. That's why you didn't want to read.
I can't imagine. Yeah, I'm really glad you got that. Just giving you an opportunity. Just giving you an opportunity.
Zophar the Nemanite. They made an appointment together to come show him sympathy and comfort him.
Yeah, and keep going.
And when they saw him from the distance, they did not recognize him, and they raised their voices and wept. They tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads toward heaven. And they sat with him on the ground several days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great.
So, first off, I can't imagine sitting with somebody 7 days. And I hope I don't have to. But sometimes you do. To be a loved one, but these guys are friends. They seem a little friendlier than they do a little later in the story, as you know. But this is a pretty big thing. They're just there. I don't think we can underestimate how important it is to just be there. You know, when a loved one dies and you have a funeral, sometimes you may not say 8 words to the person that has come to pay their respects, but those are 8 words you might remember, and you're thankful they're there. It just makes a difference.
It might not be words, it might just be a feeling.
Might be a feeling. You know, when Daniel was in the hospital and he quit breathing, Floyd came and, was there, and it was, I'll never forget that. Just made a big difference for us, for him to come. So that was a big thing. Carol handled almost all of it, as I remember. When he was screaming in there with the doctor, I, of course, stayed out in the waiting area. But boy, that was something else. I hope that never happens again. All right, so.
These guys would have been a lot better off, though, if they'd have stuck with it and not said anything.
Exactly right. If they had just shut up the whole time, rather than giving advice, they would have been a lot better off. But
we need to take a lead from that.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about that. Ray says sometimes it's best not to talk as much in these type of situations.
Especially when you're at risk of jeopardy of saying something that will make the situation worse. And how often do we hear people offer platitudes that they don't do any good, and often it just makes the situation worse. So, the best thing to say is exactly what you and others said earlier. I love you, and I'm here for you.
And a lot of times those platitudes we say are terrible biblical interpretation.
Well, some of them aren't scriptural at all.
Yeah, right. It's either non-scriptural or terrible interpretation. Richard?
Perfect example there of Job's 3 friends. They should have kept their mouth shut. But even after 7 days, they couldn't contain it. They had to ask him, what is it, Job, that you've done?
To have deserved this.
That's right.
You're exactly right. So being there is important. So what we need to be thinking about now is perhaps a 1-degree shift, a 2-degree shift, or a 10-degree shift in the way that we interact with the congregation on these types of issues, these types of often tragic things. What do we need to maybe change a little bit? Maybe change a lot. And then the congregation will start to get a sense of that and will be more like that and really will be more of what you're talking about, Jeannie, which was a great example. And I think that will make a huge difference. But remember, you have to know what's going on with other people, and then some people don't say anything, so there's nothing you can do if nobody knows it. But you have to know people well, you have to be open to those kind of things, etc. Nick?
This is as much for me as anybody else. Getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. Because that's having these conversations is gonna feel awkward sometimes because we don't know what to say. And it's a painful situation. But that's what growth feels like too. That's why we call them growing pains, because it's not comfortable. And until we're willing to embrace some discomfort for our brothers and sisters.
Well, and you know, we all have done various things for others in the congregation. Some have done a lot, some have done in between, whatever. But my limited experience has been every one of those uncomfortable situations I have been in, I've been thankful that I was in them. And not only is that the case, but often out of them, I end up with a lot closer relationship and then find out things about people that are really neat that I never knew. Thus, getting an even deeper relationship than I otherwise would have had, just through doing that.
And if you have that deeper relationship, you can have a more significant and more positive influence on that person, their family. Who knows how far that connection can reach?
And it works. It works. So I think that's the effect that we're talking about here in C. That is the effect. Now, I want to pray for a couple of things tonight. Like we've been ending sometimes class with a song, and sometimes we end class with a prayer. So I wanted to end our class with a prayer tonight. But I want to challenge you guys to be thinking about practical things that you can be doing for other people in this congregation, particularly when they're going through tough things. Doesn't have to be just when they're going through tough things, but in particular when they are. And be there for them. It just makes a big difference. So if y'all bow with me, we'll have a prayer. God, we're just so thankful that we could be here together. We're thankful that we could share, that we could really talk about some things that may or may not be as comfortable. People sharing things about how you work in their lives, and it's just my hope and my prayer that this will lead us to be more, to be closer, to have a stronger bond of love based on Jesus Christ, and to have a stronger sense of togetherness. And by doing that, we become stronger servants of the King. I pray that you be with our ministers and with our elders and with our deacons as they seek to guide us the rest of this year and next year toward, I believe, will be really wonderful things for you. We just ask all this in the name of the Christ. Amen. And we're done.